Welcome, everybody. How is horizon scanning shaping the future of forest bioeconomy? This is the title for our webinar. My name is Teppo. I come from the University of Eastern Finland at the Joensuu campus, and I'm a professor of forest bioeconomy foresight. And the background for this webinar is that for approximately 2 years or so, we have been collaborating with the European Forest Institute to establish a longer-lasting endeavor on horizon scanning, the future's method and process that can help us to better understand what might be behind the corner. And for that purpose, we have invited this webinar to get a little bit of information to all of you who have come here for this event today. And this is really a short sneak peek to the different applications and different kinds of processes of horizon scanning. And for that purpose, we have this panel of presentations and also a possibility for you to share your views and experiences in a short follow-up survey. And this is the end of my invitation and introduction. Then I'll briefly explain the agenda. So we have 3 different presentations, one of which is focusing on the research on horizon scanning as a method. The other one is focusing on how the methodology can be used to define and select the future-proof topics for our research. And the third one relating to how to make this a practice, not only a research. So how to put these ideas that have been identified to practice in a meaningful and impactful way. We are ready to go to the first presentation, which will be given by Alisa Puustinen from the Finnish Forest Center. And this is a presentation of a practical implementation of this horizon scanning.
Thank you, Teppo, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to meet you all, although I can't see you, but still pleased to meet you. Happy to have you online today. My name is Alisa Puustinen, and I work for the Finnish Forest Center. I actually hold a PhD in social sciences, so I am not a forest scientist from my background myself, but I'm here to give you some insights of the way that we use horizon scanning in our everyday work at the Finnish Forest Center in our strategic management and other actions in our organization. And if you can see my screen, then we can go on a bit more. And greetings from Mikkeli, by the way. I'm situated in the eastern parts of Finland and from my home office today, not from the office. So we actually use strategic foresight and horizon scanning in quite a few things in our organization, but we've only been doing it for about a year, just a little over a year now. So some things we've got forward and some things we are still developing, but I will give you a brief introduction of what we actually do. So by strategic foresight in our organization, we actually refer to our ability to observe, understand, analyze, and act in relation to different futures. So horizon scanning or scanning for the environment or doing different kinds of foresight activities is more like building capacities and capabilities for ourselves than actually producing reports or some other outputs. It is a way to enhance our future's capacities and our future thinking also. So it's not just about creating a fancy report, but also doing something together and learning something new together as a whole organization. Our organization has about 430 people working here. So it is practically impossible to get all the people in the same place to actually have a workshop or something like that. So we use a fairly lot Teams meetings and Miro boards and stuff like that. I will give you a couple of examples later on. But how do we actually do it? Well, we have a formal organizational foresight team that is to more or less as the kind of a focal group who keep the idea of foresight alive in our organization. And that group has participants from all our units. It's altogether 10 people, and Teppo, who started this webinar, is also part of our foresight group or foresight team in our organization as an outside expert. And then we have an informal or voluntary organizational foresight network It's a list of interested people who participate in events such as scanning the horizons for our organization for 2045. That's one of the things that we actually done. And we do it in a couple of times a year. And as I said, it's totally voluntary, but quite a few people are attending and being interested, and the amount is growing all the time, which also makes me very happy. Then we have our own Teams team online, and that is something that we use for sharing our observations. Anyone can enter the team, anyone can give their insights, experiences from the field, or share any materials that they have. Of course, I am doing most of the sharing because I manage the team, but quite a few people are starting to have their own input, which also kind of gives me a signal that, as I said, the capacities for our futures thinking, they are growing slowly because more people are taking actively part in things that we do. And we have an open Miro board, all the time open, as also in our teams. Then that is for our weak signals detection. So anyone can insert a remark anytime from something that they accounted in their own work when they met, for example, our customers on, or some experiences from the projects that they are taking part of. And what I think is most important in using horizon scanning or foresight as a strategic tool is to actually make it part of the budgeting and action planning process, because that way you can be sure that all the things that you foresee or try to foresee, all the futures that you try to imagine, they actually are inside your organization's processes. And in our case, we are trying to do it so that we have workshops with our executive board, with our managers and team leaders during the yearly planning process. So foresight is part of our yearly planning process for budget and action that we actually take in our organization. And the next slide, just a few examples of the tools that we've used. Upper right corner says ongoing scanning related to our selected trends and search for weak signals. That is one of the Miro boards that we've used for the signal detection in our organization. And then if we take from the down and left corner of the slide, the 3 horizons, that is the tool that we use to imagine the Finnish Forest Center in 2045. First, we took a look at the vision that we would, all the visions that we had for 2045, what our organization would be like in 20 years from now. And then we tried to find out the paths that we could take in order to actually get there where we desire to be. Another one from the upper left corner, which is titled as Foresight Zoo, is a tool that you can use to search for the unexpected. If you have your own trends or signals or phenomena that you're following, like in our case, one of them was increase in forest downfall, you can use this tool to dig deeper in the trend to find some unexpected effects or other phenomena that might be behind the one that you're looking for. And one more that we've used is the first symptoms of change, and that we used for AI, neurotechnology, and digitalization for just to look for some symptoms of change that we see right now and how we should react in relation to those changes. I will give you a link to the website of the Finnish Innovation Fund, who has a really nice Future Makers toolbox, and most of the tools that I've used in my work come from that toolbox. So it is in English. As I saw in the poll, there were many people who are just learning or getting familiar with horizon scanning and foresight, and that toolbox might be a really good tool for you. And then I will have 2 slides, just visualizations of the trends or the phenomena that we keep an eye on, something that might help you in your own practice, in your own organization, to visualize the trends that you've found in your horizon scanning, the signals that you found. They may be trends or weak signals or mega trends even, or something unexpected, but one of the things that we use is called this trends wheel. You might have heard about futures wheel. It's a tool, but trends wheel is just a way to visualize the trends that you keep an eye on. And we've used Pestel framework behind on trends and horizon scanning. And as said, you will have all the slides. I'm not going to go through all the trends. You can take a look at them later on. But just to give you an example of a way to visualize your own trends that you might use in your own organization. And another one is a future radar. And this is the tool that we use to find out what effects the trends have on our work. And this is like, as you can see, it's more or less just a traffic light kind of visualization of the trends that were also in the wheel. And on the red, there are things that are already going on. It is an ongoing change and it requires immediate action from our organization. Those trends are on the red. And if you take a look at the dark green, there you can see those trends that we still have time just to keep an eye on. Something that does not need immediate action, but we should be aware of the changes that might be going there. And then the light green, yellow, and the orange in between. And this is also, you will have time to take a look at it later on. And I'm happy to answer any questions after my presentation, or you can also email me later on if you want to know more. But just a couple of really simple visualization tools that you can use for your trends and the signals that you've actually found in your own organization. And this is the radar is really useful for the management team, because that's a way that you can actually focus and prioritize the things that you need to do. You can prioritize those that are on red and keep an eye on the others. So you don't have to react on everything, but just the select ones that have the most impact on your work right now. And then my final slide, just at the end, I'll try to give you some examples of where we use the foresight and horizon scanning input. I started with what we understand the horizon scanning and foresight to be. As I said, it's more like capacity building and futures knowledge building for our organization than the reports or any inputs. And then I gave you examples of some tools that we've used in our own horizon scanning work, and a couple of visualizations, again, tools that you can use in your own work to visualize the scanning that you've done. And then finally, just briefly, a couple of points where we use this in our own work. So of course, we are focusing our strategy in our organization all the time. That's one of the obvious places where we apply our foresight and horizon scanning. And also, because we are not part of the government as such, but we get all our funding from the Finnish government. And hence, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry requires us to do a performance agreement every year on a yearly basis. And we also use the horizon scanning and foresight efforts to focus that agreement, to focus on those things that are most important for our work for the next year and also for the coming years from that. And as I said already at the beginning, in our organization, horizon scanning is an integral part of our yearly budgeting process and action plans. It is built in the process already. And the final two bullet points that I have more under construction still, but we would like to use the horizon scanning in our development of capabilities, of the know-how that we need in the future. Of course, we will need to have some kind of an idea of the future first, and then we will need to scan our own organization, whether we have the capabilities that we need to succeed in those futures that we visualize in our world. And finally, we have a project portfolio about 5 million euros currently. And all the time we are trying to focus that portfolio so that it fits the future needs of forests and forestry in Finland as best of our abilities. So that is also more or less under construction still, but focusing our project portfolio is one of the key points that we like to use the horizon scanning in the future. But now, so that I leave room for all the others as well, I'm just going to thank you for your interest. And as said, you can just call me anytime, drop me an email or whatever. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
So without further ado, let's go to the second presentation. Happy to welcome awesome Eleanor too from Forestry England to give another example of how horizon scanning has been used, in this case in a little bit different purpose for the prioritization, finding and prioritizing research and development teams.
Okay, so thank you ever so much for inviting me. It's really great to be here participating in this Horizon Scan webinar. I'm Eleanor, I'm Head of Forest Planning for Forestry England. Forestry England is the state forest management department in England, so we look after all the public forests. So this is a really great opportunity to share with you a horizon scan exercise for forestry that we undertook in the UK a couple of years ago. It was a new approach. It hadn't been applied to forestry before, certainly within the UK, and we learned a lot from that process. It's been very influential now in shaping our conversations about the future of forestry across the UK and how we might prepare for what that future looks like as a sector. So just briefly, why is it that we want to be doing horizon scanning? Well, we're at this time of immense change, environmentally, socially, politically, economically, and the forestry sector and individual organisations, of course, need to be able to adapt to and respond to all that change that's going on. Now, as you'll all be well aware, by its very nature, forest management is a long-term process. So it's really crucial for us that we are looking ahead, decades into the future, and using intelligent foresight analysis to base our strategic planning and investment decisions on. What does it detect? Well, horizon scanning, certainly in the way that we've done it in the UK, is specifically to detect issues that might have a large influence on our sector and our organisation in future. And in particular, it's trying to highlight issues that we currently don't know much about. So as an example, we know climate change is going to have a massive impact on our forests, but we're already really quite well aware of that. We're responding to it. So climate change per se isn't something that a horizon scan would detect, even though we know it's going to have a big impact. But a horizon scan might detect things like emerging technologies, new wood products, social changes that are going on, shifting demands, and so on. All things that we're currently not very well aware of or planning for. So it's about finding those issues that might just completely transform how we operate in future and enabling us to think about them and consider them and plan for them now. So what I want to do today is just talk through the main stages of the horizon scanning process that we undertook. And it was good to see there were quite a few people who are less familiar with horizon scanning in that poll. So hopefully this will give you a bit of an insight into how it works in sort of a bigger, more strategic way for a country. So starting off then with planning the exercise, which is pretty important. So as I said, I work for Forestry England. We're a government agency. And a few years ago, we decided we wanted to lead horizon scanning. We wanted to detect emerging issues that we should be incorporating into our planning and decision making. But we knew that we didn't have the expertise or the experience to be able to do that entirely independently. So we approached the University of Cambridge to collaborate on that horizon scan. Now, obviously, collaborating with such a respected organisation brings huge scientific credibility to the exercise, but more importantly, Cambridge as an institution have been doing horizon scans in the environmental sciences for almost 20 years now. They have a really well tried and tested research framework that we could adopt for forestry. And their approach, Cambridge's approach, does have proven success. So some of their first ever horizon scans detected issues like lab-grown meat, using mobile phones to collect data on it, microplastics, all issues that are, of course, now really mainstream that we're all familiar with. But at the time, when they did the horizon scanning, very few people were aware of them or thinking about them. Now, our main interest, obviously, we were thinking about forestry in England, but our collaborators at Cambridge advised us to set the scope to be UK-wide. And there were several reasons for that. So firstly, concepts that are likely to be relevant at the scale of England are also probably going to be relevant at the scale of the UK. We wanted to make it scientifically interesting to a broad audience, and we wanted to bring in experts and ideas from diverse perspectives across a broad geographical basis. So the UK scale really made sense for our objectives. And to do that, we established a high-level steering group for the exercise. We had representatives on that group from across the different nations within the UK to set the direction for that project. And the first task of the steering group was to carefully set the scope of the horizon scan, and this is a pretty critical point of horizon scanning planning. So we wanted to find emerging issues and opportunities affecting the use, development and management of woodland in the UK over the next 50 years. These include but are not limited to environmental, social, economic and political factors. So that scope is deliberately broad. Basically, it includes anything and everything that might impact woodlands and forests and the way that we manage them over the medium and the long term. The steering group then had the task of selecting an expert panel to actually do the horizon scan. Now, the expert panel are crucial. They are responsible for brainstorming, for collating, debating, and ultimately selecting the top horizon scan issues that are deemed to be of greatest importance to the sector. So having diverse representation is really important. And we were really proud of the expert panel that we assembled. We had voices represented from across policy, practice, and academia, both within and outside the forestry sector. So it included lots of organisations represented that you might expect, but also quite a lot of people who were perhaps a little bit less expected. Organisations like the Ministry of Defence, financial institutions and foresight specialists. The aim was to bring together a group of people who had really diverse backgrounds, different expertise, different ideas, and also individuals who could think outside the box and might be good at detecting issues that go unnoticed by lots of other people. So my advice for anyone thinking about conducting a horizon scan is to spend quite a lot of time and effort assembling a really good group of people for your expert panel, because, as I said, they are absolutely critical to the exercise. So once we'd set our scope, we'd assembled our expert panel, our next task then was to get on with it and to do the issue collation and sorting. So I'll take you through how we went about this. The main exercise here involved all of the expert panelists widely consulting their networks. And the idea here is to brainstorm as many different issues as possible that we could include in the horizon scan. And we estimated that across the whole of our expert panel, we contacted about 7,000 people in that initial phase. And we did that through a range of ways, including things like social media, newsletters, emails, and so on. Each of the expert panelists then sifted the ideas that they had assembled from their networks, and they submitted what they thought were the best 2 to 5 issues from their network to the formal horizon scan. That then meant we had a long list of 180 ideas within our horizon scan. And we then used a modified Delphi process, which is I'm sure many of you are familiar with, a sort of standard way of sorting and prioritizing ideas. And we used that to sort and prioritize the issues from this long list of 180. So firstly, each panelist independently and anonymously reviewed and scored issues based on a few different criteria, and that included what they thought the impact could be to the sector and also whether or not they had heard of those issues. The issues that actually turned out to be quite well known, that lots of people on our expert panel had heard about or thought about, they were discarded from the list because, as I said, the point of the horizon scan was to look for unfamiliar issues or emerging ideas. And then finally, the top 30 highest scoring issues were taken through to the next phase. And this then took us to our main workshop. So that took place in person. We assembled the whole expert panel together for 2 days, and we had our shortlist of 30 issues. Each of those issues was then really robustly debated amongst the group, and the discussions formed around whether that issue was really novel, whether it was really going to have a big impact on the sector if it did come to pass. And then after each of those discussions, each issue was again scored anonymously by every member of the expert panel. And we used those scorings to identify the top 15 issues that were selected based on all of those scores. So hard work was done. We then obviously had to share the results within and beyond the sector. So the first thing we did is we wrote up the exercise as an academic research paper. We published it as an open access article in the journal Forestry, and that paper was co-authored by the whole expert panel. It was a really important step because it not only obviously recorded the detail of the methodology, what we'd done, it allowed us to discuss the results in detail, but it also gave the exercise really crucial scientific credibility by having it peer-reviewed and published in an academic journal. When the paper was then published, we were delighted. We received a lot of media coverage. It was covered in both specialist trade journals, and also the mainstream media, both within the UK and internationally. We reached over 350 outlets in both print and online, so it really did have quite a wide reach. Well, what did we find? Well, these infographics represent the top 15 issues that the Horizon Scan identified. I don't have time to go through each and every one of them today, obviously, but if you're interested, please do have a look at the full paper if you'd like more detail. I think it's linked in the information. The DOI is also up there on the screen. And as I said, it's open access. But I thought I would just highlight one or two examples to give you a bit of a flavour of the sorts of issues that we found. So number one, catastrophic forest ecosystem collapse. That was voted as the top issue by 2/3 of our panel, so it's really significant. And the point of this issue really is taking heed of what lots of you have seen across Europe, also in North America, where you have a mass dieback of forests due to the compounding impacts of climate change and disease pressures and so on. It's something that we haven't really experienced at scale yet within the UK, but this issue really was recognising that we could do. We are by no means invulnerable to that, and really trying to highlight that we need to take that large-scale forest dieback as a prospect very seriously and act accordingly. Issue number 8 was that the task force on nature-related financial disclosures would drive transparency and investment in nature positive management. So in the UK, we're anticipating that the task force on nature-related financial disclosures will become mandatory, it will become essential for large companies. And that's following what we've seen already happening with the task force on climate-related financial disclosures. That's already mandatory in the UK for large companies. And the idea here is that when businesses have to disclose their impacts on nature through the TNFD, including through their supply chains, then producers of raw materials like timber will be more closely scrutinised. And that could lead to a greater differentiation between forest companies that have got different impacts on biodiversity. Potentially it might provide greater incentivisation, greater opportunities and greater finance for nature-first forestry approaches. Issue number 11 was about the role of new technologies in worker health and safety. So this issue highlighted the huge potential of investment in technology like remote controlled devices, automated processes, and their potential to reduce the exposure to risk amongst the workforce, but also the potential of technologies like extended reality to improve training. So in short, we think there's huge opportunity to revolutionise working practices and deliver really significant improvements for worker health and safety through the emergence of new technologies. And then issue 13 highlighted that the UK commercial forest resources may not match future value chains. So we know it's likely that wood product markets will change in the coming years, and our existing forest resource may not be able to serve those needs very effectively. And equally, a focus on diversification to increase forest resilience to climate change and disease may mean that the wood that we're producing, that we're growing, is unable to meet future market demands, either because of the technical properties of that wood or the volumes that are required. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little bit of a taster on the sort of issues that we identified. And as I said, please do go in and have a look at the main paper if you want to investigate any of those ideas in more detail. But just to finish off, to conclude, I wanted to briefly reflect on what the legacy and what the impact has been of the exercise. It's of course quite difficult to objectively measure the impact. I'm biased, obviously, but it does feel like it's been a hugely successful exercise. So academically, it was a highly successful paper. It was the second most viewed contribution in the journal that year, and it has had continuing impact. So conference sessions, whole conference sessions have been organised off the back of that paper, including quite recently the Institute of Chartered Foresters in the UK centenary conference earlier this year had a whole session based around the Horizon Scan. Last year, after it was published, we also ran a webinar series which discussed each of the issues identified in the Horizon Scan in more detail. That was attended by hundreds of colleagues online. And as I already mentioned, there was really significant media attention, both at home and internationally. But I think most importantly, there's this definite sense that it was a seminal paper and it changed the conversation and direction of forestry within the UK. So for example, catastrophic ecosystem collapse has become now a bit of a buzzword that's regularly used across the sector. And it's that in itself has fostered renewed focus, more attention on the issues of forest resilience. I think a lot of the success of the exercise was down to the rigor with which we planned it and executed the project. It was scientifically credible, it had good scientific backing, and it was published. It had a broad group of well-respected experts behind it. And we then obviously followed it up with some careful, wide-ranging communications and ongoing events to continue to engage the sector. So it was always designed to be a starting point for conversation. And I think that's an important point, because horizon scans in themselves are not designed to present the solutions, but instead they're there to generate new avenues of thinking and encourage debate. And on that front, I think it's been a great success. So I will finish there. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Now we go to the third presentation, which is it's going to be given by Tuomas Mauno, and we'll move to the back office activities. So the scientific research backing up these methodologies and develops these processes for the practical use.
So my presentation is slightly different. I'm presenting you my PhD project, and of course how we have developed the methodology in the forest bioeconomy. So first I want to share an old poster slide from last year EBU Scientific Forum, because it gives you a nice overview of my PhD project. It's a 3-step scientific horizon scanning project where we try to pilot an interactive horizon scanning the forest bioeconomy in Finland. I'm not going this through in detail because you will see the more details in the upcoming slides, and I recommend you to click the QR code if you are interested, because there you can find more information about our studies. So as the title stated, our focus was on the process and advancing the use of horizon scanning methodology. But if we start first with our first step, there the leading question was how to identify weak signals affecting the forest bioeconomy. And to answer this question, we recruited a group of forest bioeconomy and futures and foresight experts to a real-time Delphi panel to discuss on how to identify and interpret weak signals. And this discussion data was aligned with 4 conceptual frameworks in the analysis. The frameworks were internal and external operating environment, multi-level perspective, complexity theory, and 3 horizons framework. And the results suggest that we need to look outside our operating environment to find the weakest signals of change, and that you can see in the figure on the right. This is another slide to summarize the results. So we need to outside the box thinking, multidisciplinary sources, and we need to understand that the weak signals have ability to surprise, like Alisa said. And for me and for this project, this first study was like the theoretical step before entering this horizon scanning activity. And that was our second step. So in this step, we piloted this interactive horizon scanning of the forest bioeconomy. And for this purpose, we recruited an regional scanning team of Finnish Forest Bioeconomy stakeholders to do online horizon scanning. And for this, we used Padlet, which is an interactive whiteboard application to collect web links and have discussion among participants. And during 9 weeks of online horizon scanning, this group of forest bioeconomy stakeholders collected 42 signals of change. And after this scanning, we did an semi-quantitative signal assessment to categorize whether the signals were weak or not. So you can see here in the figure that majority of the signals were most horizon 1 and horizon 2 signals. So they were more like trends and drivers of change rather than the weakest signals. But what was more important than the weak signals in this study was the development of the methodology in signal interpretation. So for this purpose, we used NEST framework, which is Nested Business Environment Framework. We used it in a workshop to promote sense of ownerships towards signal information. So basically this study provides an example of how signals information can be communicated to micro level in firms and other organizations. So we can see it in here figure on the right, because the thinking is similar in the first study. We need to go beyond our own fields of activity and operating environments to find the weakest signals. Yeah. But then what? Simply these two steps are not enough for the horizon scanning, because we need this decision-making step as well. This is a work in progress example of how implications wheel method have been used for responding to collected signals. So shortly, implications wheel is a participatory group process for identifying the potential higher order consequences of change. So in addition to direct effects of changes or weak signals, we need to think about second and third order implications as well. So basically this can be seen like a seed for strategic planning. To demonstrate this implications wheel, we held a workshop where we recruited 12 participants of Finnish Forest Bioeconomy stakeholders. The group was similar in the second step because this was the continuation for that interactive horizon scanning, and the signal that we processed was what if the Gulf Stream stops. So our focus was on adaptation planning, and we wanted to know how to do this group responses to this signal they have found during horizon scanning. So again, we do this and previous steps interactively with the stakeholders. And for me, this step 3 kind of closes the horizon scanning process. So we need this decision-making step as well. But similarly, this is only a starting point for foresight processes, for example, in organizations. But let's dive deeper in the signal I just presented. So this was one of the signals participants found during horizon scanning, but this is not the weakest one. As we have may have heard from the news, there are many news and articles about this possible Gulf Stream stopping. So scientifically, we are talking about Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. So the Gulf Stream is more a common term for that. But climate model projections of weakening, amok weakening during global warming are subject to considerable uncertainty. So that's why we need to consider these kind of signals as well. And what I've been saying before, this is a good example that we need to look beyond our own operating environment and beyond our business fields to find signals, because in the end, these kind of signals can have major impacts to forest bioeconomy, for example. And to connect this signal to horizon scanning, I like to think that horizon scanning is kind of an early alert system to threats, for example. And this is a good example that we need to take these kind of signals into account. And if we do this together, it's always better. So that's a very quickly presentation about my PhD project. To conclude this, we have advanced the use of horizon scanning methodology in the forest bioeconomy in step 1. We structured the understanding of weak signals with conceptual frameworks. In step 2, we took this thinking to a horizon scanning process, and we need to consider external and distant signals because they may have a major impact in the end. And to kind of close this process, we used implications wheel with what makes a strategic planning more effective. So we need this decision-making step as well. And summing up the methodological contribution, we had interaction in signal analysis, we have promoted action, orientation, and a sense of ownership. And we already have been thinking the step 4, which could be institutionalization of research-driven zero forest bioeconomy horizon scanning in Europe, because this was only the pilot in Finland, so next step could be in Europe. And that's it. Thank you.
And indeed, this is about capacity building that Alisa already in her presentation focused on and stressed. So now we are calling you for horizon scanning collaboration. And this is a joint effort so far led together by European Forest Institute and University of Eastern Finland. But this is indeed an interactive and long-lasting quest. And the collaboration can have or may have several optional forms which are not mutually exclusive. So on one hand, we can We can want to become a peer network of organizational change makers, following the example by Alisa, with a higher futures awareness. We can also learn together how to identify such research and development themes that are of growing relevance in the changing operating environment, following the example of Eleanor and the UK horizon scanning, or in addition, we could advance the futures methodology applicable to feed the knowledge needs of forest science and different forest sciences in the coming years and coming decade. And well, this is not something totally new. There has been foresight exercises, for example, in the Standing Committee of Agricultural Research. There has been horizon scanning and future signal detection and interpretation activities at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And also, just to mention a few, and I'm now considering that maybe one forum and for one avenue for further work with these methodologies and processes could be the upcoming European Forest Partnership. And I'm seeing that Mika Kallio from the Finnish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, who is the coordinator of the current proposal for that partnership, is with us today. So maybe that is one option for what to do to make wise choices in the research avenues under the auspices of that partnership. The future is ours to make. Of course, we have limited capabilities of influencing everything, but there's quite a lot to understand and to choose between the options to do when we understand better the changing nature of our operating environment. But now I would like to hear a few words from Tuomasjukka from European Forest Institute's perspective. What are the motivations and interests of EFI towards this collaboration?
Indeed, thanks a lot, Teppo. And my apologies, my video is currently not unmoving, but I'm with you. Yeah, I thank you, but also thank all the speakers for these different examples. And I think they precisely highlight why we are interested as EFI. As you know, EFI is a member organization. We have institutional members and country members. And we are living in an environment where change is happening faster and faster. And also we've seen a good number of black swans in the future. With that in mind, we would like to have this opportunity to collaborate with UEF, but also to utilize the EFI network to think with you, what could be upcoming signals? How does it influence our work directly on the scenarios reporting for the future, like we've also seen very nicely from Eleanor and also from Alisa? But also, what does it mean for the pathways that we're developing in our models to ensure that we're not too short-sighted, and that we also keep in mind, like, how does it influence our general innovation? So with that in mind, I'm very excited about this joint endeavor, and the future is ours to make, but also for us to decide what we want to address. And it is in the end about future preparedness. So with that, if you're interested, I would like to invite you to contact us and let's see further what we can do. One of the first things, maybe as a bit of a disclaimer, that we had planned apart from this webinar is, of course, to sort of bring out examples, but we're also in the process of developing a young leadership program where we're focusing on innovation and future thinking as part of the core skills that we want to pass on. So with that, I thank you for your attention.